that comes about if you do a worm's eye or a toad's eye view. If you take a satellite picture of parts of Nepal, obviously forest, and a small patch of settlement way out 3 days walking from the nearest road, Of course a rural, right? That's the eagle eye view. But go to that village, go to that house and look at that farmer and look at his income basket. And you look at the income basket and you find out that no more than 40% of his income is coming from rural sources, and 60% of his income of that particular household, 3 days walking from the nearest road, is probably coming from Dubai or Malaysia or Vienna or Tokyo. Why? Because one member of the family is probably out working and sends remittances back. The amount has become so huge in many countries, a country like Nepal, that the entire institution of foreign aid set up after the Second World War has become meaningless. Because the kind of resources that are flowing in is an order of magnitude more than any kind of foreign direct investment or foreign aid that can come in. And it's driving everything bananas. Because the planning, the so-called governmental planning that takes place, has no way of reaching or influencing what happens with households, millions and millions of households who are doing what they want to do anyway. Probably the concept of rural and urban are vanishing ends of the spectrum. The majority of the spectrum is that space in the middle called Desakota. It's area that's neither urban nor rural, maybe both. Somewhere where a household earns 40% of his income from rural sources and 60% comes from very, very urban sources. That household, and there are millions and millions all over Asia, Africa and Latin America, these households, their consumption pattern, their aspirations, their views of what they want to do is only 40% rural and maybe 60% or 70 whatever percent urban already, even without coming to live in cities. So where does international policy making and all these fancy agreements, what kind of impact would they have down there? Very little. Climate change is going to express itself through water. Whether it is through animal husbandry, whether it is through inability to flush out your waste, whether it is in crops, whatever, it is water through which climate change is going to really impact. And we have very little idea, we think we do, but we have very little idea of what it is doing to water, especially the hydrometeorological aspects from precipitation onwards. Okay. If you take this jujutsu, mental jujutsu, and flip and try to look for other ways, now political systems are designed to react to how the toads in the world are reacting. Whatever may be said elsewhere, it's that view, and unfortunately much of the academia has not managed to do that, to feed the political process with a picture that emerges from the toad's eye view. If you look at water or if you look at climate, you'll see that one climate change problem or a water problem is a very, very different problem to these very different people. Just click once more, you'd get these politics, You'd see that, with the bureaucracy, you'd get a very Nehruvian politics of, central government control, commanding heights of the economy and all that. You go to the Reagan or Thatcherite market individualism kind of politics, and you'll see a very, very different thing. Just free the market, let the market do what it wants, and you'll get your solution. You come to a more Gandhian one, the famous Mahatma Gandhi statement, the world has enough for our needs but not enough for our greed. That's a very, very egalitarian Gandhian statement of the need to rein in your own profligacy. Now, these are very different definitions of the problem that give rise to very different politics. If we have a democratic plural terrain, we find out that different solutions proposed, first of all, the problem definition is different. If your problem definition is different, you bet your boots, that the solutions proffered by each one is going to be even more different. What is the solution out of this? Give a free rein to these different solutions, what we call many 10% solutions. The space for many solutions, many 10% solutions, some may not work, some may exceed expectations, but they are small enough, resilient enough, that if one fails, it does not bring the whole system collapsing. and another solution can be tried. Now, this kind of resilience built in with this kind of pluralism, this plural politics, is probably the kind of politics that we need in the age of uncertainty that climate change is going to bring about.
The ACERN program started out as an exploratory program, asking an open question: what does urban resilience to climate change mean, and how might it be addressed? And the multiple 10% solutions is something that is a very key learning from the process. The starting point of that process, which Marcus is best placed to talk more about, is participatory dialogues at the city level, which from the outset engage a wide array of different stakeholders. And it's interesting because we're working in Semarang in Indonesia, and I know that GIZ is now working in Java in Indonesia also. One of the distinct differences between the programs is that the dialogues in the ACERN program do have a diverse range of stakeholders, whereas the GIZ initiative is looking at a technical committee that is cross-cutting across government departments, but doesn't engage these different factions which Deepak was talking about. The second thing that's come out of that program and is the need for, we're calling it on that, a resilience plan, a resilience strategy. But it's a big picture of the city and how the city works. And I warm very much to your language saying the city is about the well-being of its citizens. There are some people that I've talked to who feel that cities are about generating economic wealth, full stop. But we are working on something which we call rapid resilience. We've just completed an initiative in Sheffield in the UK. And that is saying that the starting point is the well-being of the city, of the citizens of the city. And participatory dialogues, just like ACERN, the thinkings, a lot of it's come from ACERN and the work that we've been doing with the C40, and saying, how do you maintain food and water? And it's about, and the people contributing to that discussion are not just the city planning department. They are citizens within the city, communities within the city. And I do think it has to be brought together into some kind of plan or strategy that recognizes how the urban system behaves. And therefore, all these little things we're doing are contributing to changing those behavioral characteristics and gradually moving it to a position where it's more resilient.
One of the core pieces of the ACERN philosophy, of the Asian Cities Climate Resilience philosophy, has been that you need to bring these diverse groups together. You need to have a recognition in there and the beginnings of a overall view of the urban area, that's central for developing resilience. And it's the diverse sets of actors and the many solutions in there.
What this view is saying is at different levels you find these three different proclivities, you might say. At the international level, well, you have the IPCC, you have Greenpeace, and you have, I don't know, Coca-Cola, whatever, Siemens, I mean, these are very different ways of organizing. Go down to the village level and you'll see the same thing. The question is, can we build a system which Marcus likes to call shared learning dialogue, which I like to call constructive engagement, between these very different views. They are going to remain different. But constructive engagement allows one to learn from the other. Governments to learn from markets and activists to learn that, yeah, okay, whatever it may be, we hate the government, but what the heck, without them, I mean, even my pocket will get picked and I can't do anything about it, okay? So the question is that constructive engagement framework, can it be, or are we locked into policy monism, where we are saying, one solution, National Planning Commission is going to pass this national plan for the 5-year, and that's it, It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So is there that flexibility? Is there that creativity allowing for these different spaces? So it's right through from top international right down to the local.
Look in urban areas when you have the ability of different groups to access resources and to take action. That is often when you get a lot of innovation coming out. It's, to me, this is where I get, you know, there's kind of a density of the urban innovation coming together. It's where I see a lot of innovation coming out at the very local level around water systems, around, around points of refuge for flood approaches, heavily around remittance economies. You can look in Nepal, the remittance economy dwarfs the official aid development system. A lot of that is ending up where people organize and have the right to organize in schools and buildings and other things that are the foundation systems. And that is where you get the diversified systems coming up. So to me, it's very much around that enabling that self-organization as well as hierarchy. And indeed, it's the interaction between the two. You need a system there for as a foundation for self-organization.
Constructive engagement, the shared learning dialogue, brings in people who have very, very different data filters. And because what is data to one is noise to another, you suddenly find out that a lot more issues come to the table that were ignored. If you only had the National Government Planning Department, they would have probably not seen what the market sees, not seen what the activists, the dangers they're seeing. But the constructive engagement allows them to come together and say, good Lord, I never saw that. You know, I don't like what I am seeing, but I had ignored it. So this is what leads to that systemic learning.
The things that make a difference to people on the ground are the things like the early warning system for cyclones in Bangladesh is incredibly effective, minimal cost, and was implemented within a year or so compared to building dikes or sea defences. It's a very, very good example of success. At the most micro scale, people are taught to keep their documents in a plastic bag under the ground. Because actually, if you survive the cyclone and you haven't got any documentation to say where your land was or who you are, you're in a very considerably worse off position. And anyone who's lost their passport, which I did last month, you know, as an inkling of what that feels like. So it is, you know, it is these, you know, small scale solutions and creative thinking. It isn't about large amounts of money. It isn't about building lots and lots of infrastructure.
An indoor city, which is one of the examples I gave on the water supply situation, where the municipality sees the indoor municipal utility. But actually there's all these abandoned groundwater wells all over the place, and there's a big bottled water market, and there's a big treated water market. The municipal utility and the government see the water system only in terms of their utility. But it's the diversified sources. And there are a lot of small community activities trying to start recharging wells, trying to do rainwater harvesting, diversifying the sources there. If you actually had that take off a bit, you would be able to say, you wouldn't be as dependent on that one single pumped system. There's a lot more locally that could be done. And at the same time, you might open up a debate and say, well, if we're pouring water into a piped system that loses 75% of the water that goes into it, and that then has cross connections with the sewers, and delivers a rather good intestinal dose every time you take a drink, is it inherently bad to have bottled water for some of the communities? Is it more efficient? And there's some hot button things around there around what's appropriate. But each one, the markets have come up providing the bottled water because there's a huge demand for them, and people don't get sick on the trains, they don't get sick. It doesn't reach the poor. There's a huge amount of things at the local level that could be done in terms of capturing water and recharging in that sort of situation, if you could see that as part of the water system. But it's not seen.
I think that there is a lot to learn in terms of how the world might play out from what actually happens in post-disaster situations. Humanitarian relief is easy. I mean, it's difficult on the ground, but it's easy conceptually. You know, it can be motivated by the heart. There are lives being lost and there are people dying, and your job is to try and prevent